really have individual offices. We didn't have cubicles. We had a big kind of open space that we had tables that we would work at. There weren't enough systems for us to all use, so we had to trade off. But one day I was walking around the lab, as we called it, and I saw this on a screen. One of our other programmers, Kan Yamamoto, who went on to create Mad Planets, another Gottlieb game you may have heard of, but he was playing around with switching the foreground and background. So this was the background, but he was using it as the foreground plane and then removing pieces of it to reveal something behind it. That's just what he was using. But when I looked at this, I thought, oh my God, this is really interesting. Because if something were to fall and land on any one of these cubes, it would have exactly two choices of where to bounce down, left or right. Well, two choices in programmer language is 1 bit. And that means for 7 rows, which is what we could fit on the screen, you could fit that in 1 byte, because a byte is 8 bits. So I was very excited about this, and I thought, okay, this is an opportunity for me. So anyway, I re-envisioned the screen as a pyramid, and I had Jeff Lee create the background blocks I needed to make it look like this, and then I decided to go set myself an exercise, and that's all it was just a programming exercise. I just wanted to learn about randomness and gravity. So for me it was, step 1, make a pyramid, step 2, program balls to bounce down a pyramid. I asked Jeff to make me a ball, so he made me a little orange ball. Tim Skelly had a random number generator that he shared with me. And boom, I was off and running. So what's the next step? You know, after I got this running, all right, now I have to have a player character. So I went to Jeff and I said, do you have any characters I could use? And he put a bunch up on the screen. He did. He had a bunch of characters. And pretty much, I think it was all the characters that ended up in Qbert. But the one with the orange one with the long nose just looked so pathetic. I just thought, okay, he's probably the guy. So I repurposed that, and I asked Jeff to make me all the angles that I needed, and I was off and running again. I still had no plan for a game. I was just, again, trying to teach myself how to make one. Now, you might guess from the looking at Qbert that long nose had a purpose, and Jeff's idea was that this character would shoot out of his nose. And he thought that would be pretty funny. I agreed, I thought it would be pretty funny too. But I just didn't think I could do it because I didn't know how to make a video game. So I just think that was a complicated thing. And rather than go in that route, I said, you know what, I'm not going to use it. But I still want to use the character. Then everything sort of fell into place one at a time. Obviously, have the player character collide with these falling balls. There's an obstacle, and have the player fall off. Now, this was actually kind of controversial because we were able to switch foreground and background planes. It was kind of cool that he could jump up, I'd switch, and then he would fall behind the pyramid. I thought that was kind of cool. Made it look a little more real, made it look a little more 3D. A lot of people in the office, they didn't like that because they would just walk up and they would push the joystick and he would go falling off the pyramid. And they would say, nah, we don't want that. But I stuck to my guns. People also were kind of confused about the joystick. Because if you look at the play field, it seems pretty obvious you're going up and to the left, up and to the right. You know, it's the diagonal part of it. It just seems so obvious. And yet there were people in the office who were like, oh, this is confusing. Joystick's got to go up and down and left and right. I'm like, well, yeah, but that doesn't make any sense. Where are you going to jump, right? So I stuck to my guns on that one too. And in all this time, like Howie Rubin, our VP of Business Development, one of the two guys who ran the department, he had gone away on some kind of business trip, and then he came back like 2 weeks later, and all of this was running. And he was like, what happened? What did I miss? So it didn't take long to get this kind of stuff going, but it still wasn't a game. There really wasn't a purpose. And one night I was sitting working late, which is something I did because I like my job, and I was just sort of playing around with things and just trying to figure out what am I going to do next. And Waxman, in classic Waxman form, by the way, he smoked a cigar. He always had a cigar with him. He's sitting behind me, which is very unnerving. If you've ever sat someplace and he's behind me, and you can hear him breathing and smoking, and you can smell the cigar, and he's just there. But I kind of, this was his style. He did that. He would hang around late and watch us work or talk to us or whatever. And he really wasn't a gruff guy. He was really a pussycat of a guy once he got to know him. But he had this very gruff demeanor. But I'm just sort of sitting there and just playing around, and he says, out of the blue, he says, what if the cubes change color when he lands on them? Boom. And I'm like, yeah, that's right. That's awesome. Now it's a game. So now it's a game. And then I proceeded. And, honestly, everything sort of fell into place after that. All of these things. Obviously you need an enemy. We're going to have him follow Cuber. We're going to kill Cuber and catch them and fly and escape this. Everything here just seemed obvious to me. These are things you do. The only thing maybe that wasn't obvious was Ugg and Wrong Way. They're coming up from different directions. Now, I got to tell you, that was Jeff's idea. And I got to tell you something that, the way Jeff and I work, because I was not so arrogant to think that, oh, I know what's best. I didn't think that at all, because it was my first game. But I knew what was fun to me, and I knew what I thought would work, and I had a sense of humor, and Jeff had a similar sense of humor. So I really respected Jeff's input, even though, again, Gottlieb was a programmer-centric place to work. The programmers were really responsible. So my title was designer, but I respected Jeff, and so I listened very much to anything he said. I rejected many of his ideas. So I saw my role on the game as the filter. I was the filter. I was the one who decided if something went in, which had to be because I was also the only programmer. So I had to put it in. It wasn't going to go in. But I'll get Wrong Way. I kind of resisted a little bit. I was like, that's too hard. We couldn't do math. Nowadays, you can do math really easily. But back then, you tried not to do math. You had to fake it. But ultimately, I took on the challenge, and I did Ugg and Wrong Way. I was very, very pleased when I got it right. Sort of right. The collision detection was really the part that was absolutely crazy on that. And now, look, here's another business card. But if you notice, there's a different address. This is the address of our main plant. So what happened was, during the development of Cuber, right in the middle, management decided, let's not have these guys out there by themselves unsupervised. Let's bring them back into the fold. So we were brought back to the main plant, which was filled with pinball designers. And unbeknownst to us, the pinball designers were not feeling too great about video games. I mean, if you 1980s, certainly 1970s, video games are the hot thing, and everybody's like, pinball, what the hell's that? They're not interested. So they were feeling kind of like the forgotten stepchildren. And when we were sort of thrown in, we were all excited to meet these pinball guys because we love pinball. And we were excited to meet them. And we came in, and they were giving us the stink eye like you wouldn't believe. We were walking in and getting these dirty looks, and we were like, why? Why are these guys getting... Well, the management did not in any way introduce us or encourage us to know or do anything. They literally just threw us in, and it all worked itself out. It took a while, but it did work itself out. So here's a picture of me. It's the only picture I have of me developing Cuber. There it is. It's not a very good picture. But there are a number of things in this picture. And I do look like that guy from the game, don't I? But there's a number of things to notice. One is, if you notice, the pyramid is upside down. And that's because I was working on a cocktail version. They had cocktail tables. They were flat tables, so if you were at a bar, you could put your cocktail on. And since the players would sit opposite, you'd have to flip the screen. So that's that. And then if you look at the bottom left, you'll see a joystick, which is actually mounted on the bottom of a Tupperware bucket. And that's what I had. That's what I was using. I didn't have a cabinet. I didn't have a control panel. I had a bucket. And people kept on, now I had that bucket rotated like a diamond because I needed that. And people kept rotating it back, and then they wouldn't be able to play. So it was, again, that confusion. This blue thing behind me, that was our development system. It was made by Intel. We called it the Blue Box. It took 9-inch floppy disks, if you can imagine such a thing. We were working in very crude era. We did eventually swap out these blue boxes for IBM PCs, but we used the first version of the IBM PC, which didn't even have a hard disk. It had 2 floppy disks, each holding about 384 kilobytes.
Wow.
The first hard disk, I remember when the first hard disk came out, we were all like, oh my God, a megabyte? It seemed insane. Here's a picture of Jeff Lee. Again, not a real picture. But this is actually Jeff Lee, and it was really from the flyer of Us versus Them, drawn by a guy named Larry Day, an artist who created this flyer. Us versus Them being a Laserdisc game that I did after. Here's a real picture of Jeff Lee. This is actually taken from a behind-the-scenes kind of video. I shot some video in the office, which is really horribly embarrassing. That's why I don't show it very often. We all look like idiots. But this is from that, and if you notice, he's leaning on a cubicle wall, and there's a Kubert calendar, and I'll talk a little bit about, I'll show you that later. But let's move on. Kubert. Why does Kubert talk the way he does? Well, this is time to introduce the third member of our team, and that is Dave Thiel. Dave Thiel is a sound guy, and this is him at a trade show, one of the trade shows in the late 1980s. He hated, well, let me talk about our soundboard. We had a soundboard. This is the Kubert soundboard, and actually all the Gottlieb games had this soundboard. And if you see where the upper left there is an arrow pointing to a chip. That chip is called the Votrax chip, and it's supposed to be a speech generator. It's supposed to talk. It has built-in phonemes, phonemes being the elements of speech, and you're supposed to be able to string them together to make words. The only problem is, it sounds terrible. So Dave hated this chip, and he hated using it. He particularly had trouble with it in pinball games because he tried to get it to say bonus, and it always sounded like bogus. If you programmed bonus, it would come out bogus all the time. So he hated it, and he's the one who had this idea. You know, I had Kubert running around getting hit in the head with the balls. Jeff had this idea for the cartoon balloon, and he was like, oh, this is great. You know, I can use this speech chip to just go, you know, put random phonemes together, and it sounds like cursing. So, you know, everybody had a contribution, and it was brilliant. We all thought it was perfect. There are 2 things that that the game says in English, and when you power it on, it says, "Hello, I'm turned on." And then I believe at the end, when you put in your initials in the high score table, it says, "Bye bye." But that's the only speech. And if you think you hear speech, it's not. I mean, it might be. I mean, you're hearing what you're hearing, but it's literally random, so nothing's programmed in. And how did Kubert get his name? Well, you know, here's a listing from my actual code. This is the code. And if you look up at the top, it says name, subroutines, it says cubes. Assume cubes. You'll only see cubes. Player, start player, there's a little routine there. Player collision. Everything I coded was generic. I didn't name anything. I wasn't thinking about names. I was just trying to get this thing to be fun. Here's another little listing here. This is the start player routine. So the name Kubert isn't anywhere. I just referred to it in the code as player. So we needed to name things, and we all realized that at some point as the game was being finished. Yes, sir.
What language is this?
This is assembler language, 8088 or 8086 assembler language. So we decided, you know, he needs a name, and Jeff had names for all of these characters. Right? You know, some were obvious, like the Snake, Coily, Ugin, wrong way. He named Slick and Sam. Was supposed to sound like Spick and Span, and we had a programmer named Sam, so that's where that came from. But the player character, you know, nobody really had a feeling for what we should call him. Howie Rubin, our Vice President of Business Development, he had an idea for what we should call it. He wanted to call it this. And we're like, well, what? He's like, you just call it that. We're like, Howie, what are people going to say when they want to talk about the game? He said, they'll find a way. I don't know, they'll find a way. And he insisted that we put the game out on test with marquee, you know, with no name. And this is actually a picture of a hand-drawn one of those early marquees. It is different from the printed marquee that was eventually done, which I actually have is my next slide. But Howie was like adamant. Anyway, so we put this out on test with these hand-drawn. You can still find these. There's some of these floating around. Eventually, we made a printed marquee with just the cartoon balloon. But eventually, we all sort of talked him down off the ledge, and we decided, yes, we're going to give the character a name. Well, we figured the name of the game should be the name of the character. That's something everybody agreed on. And what I did is I went around and I polled everybody at Gotham, literally everybody. I just said, what do you think? What do you want to call him? And I had a legal pad filled with names. They were all terrible. They were all terrible. I only remember one, Arnie Aardvark. That was one of our managers, Frank Starshak. He was like, he looks like an aardvark. Got a long nose. Arnie Aardvark. So anyway, we had a meeting. What are you going to do? We had a meeting. We had about 10 or 12 people sitting in a conference room talking about what to name this guy. This meeting went on for like an hour, and I just sat back and I said to myself, what are we doing? We're grown men here talking about this ridiculous character, but we couldn't agree on anything. And then somebody, and again, I'm not sure who did what at this point. Somebody went up to the blackboard there and wrote on it, Hubert. They were like, I just think Hubert is a goofy name. And then somebody else saw the connection to cubes, and they came up and they erased the H and they said, oh, Cubert!
Yeah.
Because it's about cubes. And then and we're all going, I think, and you could feel this weird energy in the room, like, I think we're onto something. And then somebody else walks up and goes, no, Cubert! And we're all like, we're frothing at the mouths here. We feel like we're inventing a cure for cancer or something. And then Jeff Lee goes up and he puts the asterisk, and we're all like, yes! And it was just crazy that we all just knew it. It was like, that's it, that's the name of the game. Let's talk about the knocker. The knocker. You know, when Hubert falls off, there's this sound. It's awesome. A lot of people love that feature. A lot of people come to me and say they love that feature. I do love that feature, but I love it. It's tainted because I know how much better it could have been. Now, the knocker, what you're hearing is this little device. It's a pinball knocker. When you play pinball, things trigger it, and it literally knocks the side of the cabinet. It's a little piston that shoots up and makes this knocking sound. And I thought the knock sounded wrong. Like, it should have been a thud, right? It's this guy, it should sound like a sack of potatoes, not like somebody knocking at your door. So we put a little piece of foam rubber right at the point where the piston hits. And my God, it sounded perfect. It sounded like something just landed in the bottom of the cabinet. And I was like so jazzed about this. And then they said, you know what? Manufacturing is saying we can't do it. It's too much labor. It's too labor intensive to put that piece of foam. Hello? Hello? Anybody there?
Is that mine? Sorry.
Oh, that's all right. No worries. Anyway, so it went out without the foam, and you love it, and that's great, and I'm very happy, but I was disappointed. As the game was completed, it became time to test it and tune it. And I was new to this. This is all new to me. Well, there are 3 ways we did testing. One was people in the office would come and test it. Let's do that again. There you go. In-house testing. So people in the office would just come and test it and give you feedback. And if I liked something they said, I would do it. And if I didn't like what they said, I wouldn't. Probably didn't do more things than I did, but always happy to take a good idea. The next thing we did was location testing in local arcades. We'd take the game out, we'd put it in an arcade. A lot of times I would go to the arcade and watch people play. And that was really valuable. That was really valuable. Like, I remember there's a little girl, came up, she put her quarter in, and jumps right off the pyramid. 3 times in a row, just loses her quarter like that. And I felt, oh damn, I'm gonna have to do something about this. And then she went away. But then she came back. And somebody else came by who figured out how to not die off the pyramid, and then she would watch that person, and then she would go, and then she would be able to do it. And that was the thing that really made me, you know, feel confident that we had something good. People came back. It's not like they just died and then were disgusted. People kept coming back. And it tested very well. Obviously, it was, you know, bringing in the coins, and management, I should say, was very happy. Oh boy, 15 minutes, okay, getting there. Focus groups. Focus groups is, you know, you guys know what focus groups are, yes?
What was the maximum amount that the arcade had to get as far as quarters showing to know that, you know, it was a keeper?
Well, it wasn't like there was a maximum amount. It's really, it was like a competition. So every game was competing against every other game. So if the, you know, because every location is different. So if you were in a, like, you know, a bar or something, and you're going to make $175 a week out of this machine. Well, if Kubert came in and made $225, that's good. If it made $100, that's bad. So it was all relative. Anyway, focus groups, the thing I learned about focus groups is that what people say and the way they behave, completely different. So I was behind the glass watching people, and they'd play it, and I'd watch them, I'd see them get into it, I'd see them be excited, and then you'd ask them later, like, hey, so how was that experience? They're like, yeah, it was all right. So, but I did learn a lot, and I tried to tune. One of the things I learned, unfortunately, because a lot of people who we tested were not real gamers, it just, they felt like the game was too hard. So I kept scaling it back. I kept making it easier and easier, especially in the early rounds, and slower. And I was doing this basically to please the audience because I didn't know. I just thought this is what I had to do. And it turned out, you know, well, I'll tell you about that later. This is just, if you're tech dudes or gals, the CPU is at 8088. Our sprite images, I think I said, were the foreground. Oh, actually, that's wrong. Oh, no, that's correct. The foreground is 16 by 16, not 32 by 32. Coily was 2, so he was 32 tall. The background blocks, 8 by 8 pixels. We had 64 kilobytes of memory. That's how much memory we had for the entire game. Yeah.
Can I take a picture of the screen?
Sure. 3, 2, 1. And the screen resolution, 254. Anyway, okay, enough of that. So the game was done, it was tuned, I did the best I could, and now it's time to go public. So, you know, they started rolling off the production line. This was an amazing sight to me when I first went down to the plant, and I just see rows and rows of cubes, an incredible feeling. But then we had to show it to people too. It wasn't just, you know, and you know, the sales department was on it. They were selling it. We had good collections in our reports. This is a picture of the AMOA. It's one of the 2 big trade shows at the time in the coin-op industry. And this was, I know it's a terrible picture, but who knew this? I'd be showing it to anybody 35 years later. But this was where they showed Kubert to people in the industry, the coin-op industry, for the first time. Here's a page from the, this is from Replay Magazine, which is like the trade paper for the coin-op industry. And I'm going to zoom in here on one picture. This picture over here, of course, it's pretty typical with the press. They get a lot of things wrong. So they say there's designer Jun Young, which is true. He was the hardware designer. He didn't design the game. And then programmers Warren Davis and Howard Rubin. Well, Howie was not a programmer. Furthest thing from the programmer. He was the vice president of business development. But they tried. Some more press. Here's from, I think it's an electronic games magazine called The Showstopper. Again, from its first release, or exposure, I should say, the AMOA, people were responding positively to it, which is fantastic. And this is a magazine called Playmeter, and they had Kubert as their top pick from the AMOA, which is like a fantastic thing. They had 3 different guys down at the bottom, all Kubert's at the top of all their lists. That was really awesome. Management, needless to say, was thrilled because they needed a hit bad. A hit meant they could build a lot of these machines and they could keep the production line rolling because the way the pinball industry was is you didn't have a hit, you scaled that production line down, you built as few machines a day as you could, you had to start laying people off, that would be bad. But we were not doing that. We were, Kubert sort of kept the company going. and they appreciated that a lot. And they appreciated me, and I, pretty much had carte blanche at Gottlieb after that. So, I didn't make money off of it because Gottlieb owned the rights, but I was just so grateful to be able to have the opportunity to do something like this. Anyway, let's see, what's next? Oh, yeah, so all of this great attention and success, and everybody is so excited about this game. It's a hit, it's a success. I'm not enjoying that yet. I'm thinking about the reports we're getting about people playing to, level 9 and beyond on one quarter. I couldn't do it. Nobody I knew, nobody at Gottlieb could play that long, but obviously you put it out in the field and there's good gamers out there. And the other dirty little secret is that even though the levels go from 1 through 9, nothing changes after level 5. It's tuned up through level 5, and then it's exactly the same. So there you go. I admit it.
Secret.
Clean. I feel awake. But here are the problems, as I understood. It was too slow. I made it too slow. And it was too easy, because again, people were having a hard time, and I made it too slow, too easy, and not challenging enough. So in order to address all of these things, I thought, okay, here's what I've got to do. I've got to make it faster, harder, and more challenging. So, and that's why right after I was done with making Qbert, I started working on this. Faster, harder, more challenging Qbert. I didn't want to call it Super Qbert or Qbert 2 or anything like that. But notice something else. Look at the copyright. It says Milestar Electronics. So I got to tell you the story. Gottlieb, I don't know why, they decided to change their name to Milestar Electronics. And they brought us all down. We had a company meeting, and they brought us in, and they had a big cardboard thing with a sheet draped over it, and they had this big unveiling because we didn't know the name. We didn't know what the name was going to be. And they, boom, Miles, and they showed us this logo, Milestar Electronics. And the first thing I said out loud, do you know that's rat slime spelled backwards? And I thought it was funny. Everybody else seemed to think it was funny. The president of the company did not think it was funny. I don't know who they paid to come up with this name and this logo. They paid somebody, but they were not happy. Anyway, they stuck with it. Here's some gameplay. This is actually faster, harder, more challenging Qbert. So, I mean, it is fast. It starts out faster. I insisted on that. But you notice that Slick and Sam, they'll change the cubes to a color that Qbert cannot change back. The only way Q can change that is you have to get Coily or Qbertha. This is a new character, Qbertha. You have to have them follow you over that cube to get it to change color. You also might notice the discs moving. The discs aren't stationary; they actually move. So you have to time your jumps so that you don't miss the cube, the disc as it moves. And there was also a bonus round in this where just buttloads of Slicks and Sams would fall, and you just have to try and scoop them up and try and change his colors. And there was a little preamble to this bonus round where Qbert spins around on a cube. He comes in from the left, spins around, and his nose extends into this cup. Actually, the reason we had this is because we were asked to do a special mellow yellow version of Qbert. There was a contest, and they said we want to make this special. So we created this animation with a mellow yellow cup. And I also weirdly I have memories of doing this for 7-Eleven. I feel like I made a 7-Eleven version too. Anyway, the Qbert calendar. This is just something that happened, because everybody at Gottlieb really liked the game as well. And so one of the artists we had, Chris Brewer, he was a programmer and an artist, he created a calendar, an entire calendar, which he just Xeroxed and gave out to everybody. And I just found it, so I find this an interesting thing. This actually has got Qbertha up there. But yeah, he drew this whole thing. This whole thing is very nice. It's March, the gusts of wind, first day of spring. And then he also made this thing called the Qbert Coloring Book. This is the front and back page, it's bound. It was so clever, I thought, and it was all using the puns. The cube, puns. Julius Caesar, Q-Beard the Pirate. This is just a couple of pages from it. Tropical fish, Jacques Cousteau. Now, this whole thing with the Q's, you know, management jumped on that as well. This is an actual ad that we put out before, even I think it was in the AMOA, but you can see it says everything's with Q's. Q, Q, Q. I'm just going to quickly go through this. This is like the aftermath. It really, again, took us all by surprise. It was very gratifying, but Qbert was just in a lot of magazines. This is an insert point here, a little feature by Roger Sharp. By the way, I don't know if you know Roger Sharp. He wrote a great book about pinball. I actually worked with him at Williams years later. Here's USA Today. He's talking about Qbert. Crazy. Magazine covers, electronic games. Here's a joystick.
Wow.
Look at this. John Cougar. Invidiate magazine leaning up against a Qbert. I'm telling you, it's crazy. It's a Japanese ad. This is a cover of Video Games Magazine. They did a cover story on American games. This is American games versus Japanese games. And they featured was Qbert and Joust. Now, I didn't know at the time John Newcomer, who designed Joust. I didn't know him. I would get to know him because he would come to work for Gottlieb later for a very short period of time. And then we both ended up at Williams, and we actually worked on a project together. It's a long story. We're not going to talk about it. But this article was interesting because management would not let them use our names in the article. They would not let them credit us by name. So I was called designer. Jeff was called artiste. It's clever how he did that, right? And then Dave was called J Walkman. And we were a little thrown by this, but I guess there was a lot of poaching in the industry. People would find people who worked on successful games to try and steal them away, and they didn't want anybody to know who we were. They took a lot of backlash for this, I think, when it came out. And so when I did Faster, Harder, More Challenging Qbert, I actually was able to put in a credits page, and we are credited. And you'll notice I specifically did not say designed by, because as I said earlier, I felt we were the triumvirate. The three of us really created this game together. I couldn't have done it without them. They couldn't have done it without me. More stuff. Glamour magazine from August of 1983. Last place in the world I'd expect them to be talking about Qbert. But now the marketing people really jumped on it. They really did. This is from a Sunday paper, the comics section of a Sunday paper, a contest. You could actually win a full-size Qbert arcade game. Wow. How cool is that? Here's a brochure that they put out. It mentions the TV series, 125 plus licensed products. Oh my God! Whoa. Look at all this stuff. Obviously T-shirts, figurines. I didn't get any of this stuff. I had to buy it all myself. If I wanted something, I still have my Qbert plush toy, my little children slept with, and I still have that. But yeah, it really was crazy. Card games, breakfast cereals. Here's an ad for the Mellow Yellow thing that I was talking about earlier. I'm just going to run through these quickly. This is the Consumer Electronics Show from 1983. Wow. And this is where all of the home games for Qbert were introduced. Just happen to have some pictures, They were different systems, the different home systems. But let me talk just a second about Qbert's Cube. So when I was done with Qbert, and by the way, Faster, Harder, More Challenging Qbert never got released. I literally did it right after Qbert, and people were still learning Qbert. They were still manufacturing Qberts. So they did not know, what to do with it, and it was too soon. And I would have thought they would have just shelved it and put it out 6 months later. They did not. And then like a year later, they folded and could not. So it went, just went on sitting in my cabinet at home for 20 years until I released it to me. But this is Qbert's Cube. So another programmer at Gottlieb named Neil Bernstein came up to me and said, I got an idea for like a Qbert thing. Do you mind if I do it? And I heard he said I had no intention of doing a sequel because I felt like I'd done it and I wanted to move on to other things. And I said to Neil, go for it. You have my blessing. And so he did Qbert's Cube. I had nothing to do with it at all other than supporting him. And yeah, the Cupid's Quest, again, I didn't have anything to do with it. John Trudeau, as I said, did that. I don't know how many of these they built. I feel like it's kind of a rare thing. And I kind of mentioned earlier, Milestar died in 1984. They closed their doors, and then I moved on to other things. I was out of the industry for a year, and then I went to Williams. Many more stories that I do not have time to tell you. So I'm going to leave you with two little slides that take about 10 seconds. This is the three of us reunited at the Chicago Midwest Gaming Classic. What was it called? Oh, the Pinball Expo. That's it. And first time we'd been together in about 30 years. So it was really great to see them. I've seen each of them individually, but it was the first time the three of us were together. And in doing my research for this talk, I came upon this on the internet, and I just have to share this image with you. Because apparently, you too can buy this on the internet. And the thing I love about this is that guy's face. He said, "This is what my life has come to." So thank you so much for